But now the biggest change, and perhaps the most controversial one, considering how big this was when it comes to Classic, is the removal of world buffs and raids. Hey people, I hope you're having a nice week. I hope you're having a nice evening or day or whatever. I'm actually very excited to share the news that we have here. I don't think I've been this excited about the game since possibly the launch of Classic way back more than 2 years ago now. I'm gonna start off by giving a quick TLDR, and then I'm gonna go into more detail and talk about more changes that are gonna come in the Classic Fresh. Now what we've gotten is a date for the open beta for essentially Classic Fresh, or they're gonna call the WoW Classic Seasons of Mastery. Now the beta will open on October 5th, and well, October 1st is tomorrow, so less than a week now. And I'd say that the 4 biggest changes, and I'm gonna take it in the order medium big to huge. Partly, no debuff limits on bosses. In vanilla we had 16 limits, so no more than 16 debuffs, and then they would start pushing each other off, which essentially, for example, meant that only 1 or 2 warlocks could use the corruption curse, or the corruption ability. I mean, that's not a curse. But now every single warlock can use it. Rogues couldn't use Rupture or Deadly Poison. Now all rogues can use it. Feral Druids couldn't use their bleeds. It's actually, despite just changing one thing, the number of debuffs, it's actually gonna have a big impact on the kind of rotations that you can play. Many classes were just forced into a certain rotation because otherwise you would push up debuffs that were very important for the overall raid DPS. But now that's entirely gone. So just go nuts, put up whatever you want on the boss. That's one of the changes. Another one is that leveling is significantly faster. They wrote about it being, we can actually scroll down here, faster leveling. They're talking about having rates similar to the Burning Crusades, meaning essentially that leveling from 1 to 60 should be something like 3 days instead of being like 5-6 days the way we had it in the first iteration of Classic. And what they're writing is a big focus on quest experience increases. We're just gonna see what happens because of that, but I guess for most people, especially this time around, almost everyone are gonna be returning players who played Classic the first time. I think it's just gonna be a very convenient change. So that was the debuff. We've talked about the leveling. The third one is gonna be a significantly faster pace for the phases. So first of all, they're gonna add the PvP honor system and battlegrounds already in phase 1. So this is gonna be in the game on launch. Meanwhile, we had to wait for them the first time around. Besides that, they've also made it, instead of roughly 2 years long, it's just gonna be a year long, if I'm interpreting this information correct. Meaning, essentially, you're gonna have 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. All of them are gonna be added within the span of 12 months. So I'm thinking that perhaps phase 2 is gonna come a month into release because it's a pretty minor patch. 3 months later, maybe phase 3, maybe 2 months, phase 4, maybe 4 months, phase 5, 4 months, phase 6, and that's the entire game. It's gonna be way faster, and that should really help you avoid having those, well, what do you even call them? When you have nothing to do. There should not really be that kind of thing in the game this time around. But now the biggest change, and perhaps the most controversial one, considering how big this was when it comes to Classic, is the removal of world buffs and raids. So there's not going to be any reason for you to run around. You don't need to get to, let's say, Mulgore or Elwyn Forest to get your Dire Maul. No, it's not Dire Maul, it's Darkmoor Fair buff. And that could be really difficult on PvP servers especially. You won't have to get to Dire Maul, you won't need to go up to Felwood, you don't have to go to Stormwind or Orgrimmar, and you don't have to go to Crossroads as Alliance if you really want to go hard. All of that is just gone. You don't have to get the Sansa buff either. Now I suppose they're not gonna disable the like the sheen of Sansa, you know, the 50 spirit and stamina or speed or whatever. But that is gonna be a massive change. And just that change alone, I think, is gonna make raids, well, I think at least slower and to some extent harder, especially in Naxxramas, I feel. Anyway, I feel like that is the TLDR. You're gonna get the beta, it's gonna open in, well, from this video's making, it's gonna be less than a week. What's that, 5 days? We're gonna get to test everything out. Faster leveling, no world buffs in raids, no debuff limit on bosses, and a faster pace of the game. With that said, we're gonna look a bit more in detail and add more changes that are not that big, but still significant. So, going through, they're just greeting us, saying welcome. Fresh for level 1 for a complete reset of WoW Classic content, starting again at the very beginning of the World of Warcraft saga. As with the first release of WoW Classic, we're planning 6 content release phases. In WoW Classic Seasons of Mastery, however, phase unlocks will happen faster, and that was what we talked about, 12 months instead of roughly 2 years. And they changed the PvP system to be added. I think it was added in phase 2 or, yeah, phase 2 earlier, but now it's gonna be in the game on launch. So, we're not gonna have that crazy season of World PvP that we had back in the days. And by back in the days, I mean like, you know, 20 months ago. Raid boss updates, and I only mentioned 2 of these, but there are actually more pretty big changes here. And they're talking about how the bosses in Classic were significantly easier than what they had anticipated, partly because people were way more prepared than they were the first time around. And what they want to do is simply increase the difficulty to actually make the bosses somewhat more challenging. These changes currently include but are not limited to, and obviously none of these things I think are completely set in stone. This is the beta. If something works out really poorly, they will probably and hopefully change it. But here's what they're gonna change. Besides the no world buffs, which at least is very convenient, but I think it might upset people, and that itself might also change the, well, the composition of raids quite a lot, because warriors by a mile benefited the most from world buffs. But now that they aren't around, probably, maybe you won't even need that many warriors or want that many warriors. Restoring mechanics that were removed early on to some raid bosses. I do not know which mechanics these are. What I do know was that they added like 13 patches to vanilla. So there were a lot of changes, and who knows what is gonna be new. Increased health on bosses to offset players' buff and the removed debuff limits. So essentially more health on bosses, longer fights. Our intent with these changes is for this experience to feel somewhat more challenging than WoW Classic did in 2019. Now, as a quick comment on this, in the early games, or in the early version of WoW Vanilla, things were significantly harder, partly because there were mechanics apparently that had not been removed yet, and also a lot of items got big buffs throughout the game. Like, you might think that there were items with weird itemization or weak stats in Classic, but that's nothing compared to what they had in early Vanilla. For example, part of Druid tier 1 was just pieces with 0 healing power. Instead they had like plus arcane damage, and that was like half the set. Now granted, the other part of the set had like way more healing, so in the end the entire set gave roughly the same amount of healing, but it was just way stranger. Anyway, we're gonna look at the leveling now. So we've already talked about this, more experience from quests. 1 to 60 XP rates are somewhat closer to the Burning Crusade Classic. Now granted, I don't think they're gonna be adding... there were certain extra quest hubs that were added in TBC for Azeroth. I don't think they added them. I can think of one example being in Dustwell on Marsh. Now the quality of life updates, and these were the ones we didn't really talk about or get into. And some of them that they have included is, for example, meeting stones converted to summoning stones. A minor change, but you're not gonna have to level a warlock to level 20 now, just to summon people. And this is actually gonna be major. If you're Alliance and you want to do Scarlet Monastery when you're level 38 to get nice weapon or whatever, well, now only 2 people, or I guess, I don't know if it's 2 or 3, I think 2. Only 2 people have to make the run from, well, I guess, wherever you are, let's say Ironforge, instead of 5 people. And this will also make traveling around the world so much easier. Because maybe you can even sell summoning services way easier. Like you can just, let's say it's time to go to Destilus and you can't be arsed to do the run. Well, maybe you can just buy the summon for 2 gold from some random dude. Increased mining and herbalism nodes. I'm not sure, I don't remember how much of the dynamic respawn system that affected these spawns in Classic, and I remember. But it should be way easier to farm these now. And I think this might also make the world more living, because one kind of criteria for a good farm in Classic was that it was instanced, because then you could reliably get mining nodes and herbs. But if there's gonna be way more in the open world, maybe it's generally just gonna be better, you know, fighting out there, even if you have to fight players. And then we have finally, yeah, they've talked about just those changes. WoW Classic Season of Mastery will have an open beta beginning on October 5th. We look forward to hearing your feedback on these changes and many others as we continue to iterate on them. Keep an eye on the forums and, well, that stuff for the latest developments. So, personally, I'm really excited. This is gonna be so fun. For several reasons, I actually might think that this time around, the overall experience of the game might be better. Now, I don't think you can beat the hype in any way that you had for the first iteration of WoW Classic, right? It was huge. It was announced like a year before it was released, and, you know, people were making guides and stuff for an entire year. It really built up, all the streamers were there. I think it was the biggest beta that I've ever seen, and I haven't seen too many anyway. I don't think it's gonna be close to that this time around. But I do think that the players that really enjoy Classic Vanilla, are the ones that are gonna be back. So I think that overall the experience might actually be better this time. Maybe not as epic, but better. But we're just gonna have to see what it's like. I'm gonna be playing on the beta, I'm gonna be streaming it. I'll have the link to my stream in the comment section below. I hope you're all excited, I'm very excited. With that said, I hope I'll see you on the beta. And I hope I'll see you on Classic Fresh or WoW Classic Seasons of Mastery whenever it's out. Have a nice evening. I'll see you later.